his response was one of the first responses that made me think positively about this little baby I was carrying. And I went on my way and I thought to myself, okay, like this is happening and I'm going to do this. I shared with my best friends, I shared with my family, and I told them that I'm going to keep this baby. And that, fear of maybe not being ready to be a mom really quickly turned to excitement.
Welcome to The Rainbow Connection. This podcast was designed for mothers who are finding their way through life after loss. Whether you're grieving, trying to conceive again, newly pregnant, or holding hope in your heart for what's to come, this space is for you. Each week, you'll hear real and tender stories of love, heartbreak, healing, and the babies who continue to shape us. I'm your host, Kristin Mundy, a mother, doula, and a woman who's walked this path too. May these conversations remind you that you are not alone, that your baby is never forgotten, and that hope and grief can live here together. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about Mother Like No Other, a special community for women who are navigating the tender season of life after loss. Inside Mother Like No Other, you'll find a warm, supportive space of moms who truly get it, plus practical tools to help you through the hard days. You'll have access to a private online community where you can connect with me, an experienced doula, and other moms navigating the same journey. Each month, we gather for live workshops to connect and learn, covering topics like supporting your fertility journey, grounding strategies, self-advocacy, and ways to nurture your mind, body, and soul. We also bring in guest speakers to share their expertise and inspiration. The best part? It's only $22 a month. No long-term commitment, just real support when you need it most. If you're ready to feel more grounded, connected, and held through this season, come join us at thedoulalife.ca/mother. You do not have to go through this journey alone. And by joining us inside Mother Like No Other, you won't have to.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rainbow Connection. Today, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're going to have our second solo episode with just me. So no one else to introduce. If you're listening in for the first time, hi, I'm Kristin. First off, full disclosure, I am still a little bit sick. I'm still recovering from illness. So I might have a little bit of a stuffy nose. I might have to, cough or break for water, but bear with me because this is just, I guess, my new normal. I've been sick pretty much the whole winter. Can't wait for spring. Today is February 2nd. So we are heading into a new month and a new week. And there can be a lot of feels with that, but I am pretty excited, I guess, to start another month knowing there are no goals. There is no pressure. It's another month of hibernation. There is like this huge pressure from, starting off a new year. And sometimes even when we're starting a new month to do things differently or to have these big dreams and to, hit the ground running. And I think life and the seasons are asking us or calling us to do something different. And that is to take things slow and go inward and to hibernate. And that's my plans for February. And I'm really looking forward to another month of doing that. I've had a lot of questions lately and a lot of inquiries or requests just to come on here and share a little bit more outside of what I share in our workshops or in our community spaces. So that's kind of what today is going to be about. There has been a lot of questions too about my story, and a lot of people have discovered me later on in my story, but my story starts obviously 37 years ago, and we're not going to go there. But I thought I would just tap into a little bit more of how I got here today and a little bit more of my motherhood journey. I recently had a post go viral talking about one of my miscarriages. And unbeknownst to me, I never kind of expected this to happen, but it brought up some really valid challenges and some really valid questions that I've had to sit with. And I think on Instagram, if you're coming here from Instagram or you follow me on Instagram, I obviously share a lot about my life on there. But I didn't really share a lot about of my life beforehand. So I'm going to explain what I mean by that. I've had 4 losses. And often, and it makes sense why, but I often, focus a lot on the death of Vienna and the death of William. And because, the death of Vienna, I couldn't that was unavoidable. I couldn't push that down anywhere. And I very publicly shared my pregnancy with her on my platform. So when she died, there was not pressure, but I obviously needed to include people about what happened slightly. And in that process of doing that, I found a lot of healing. I found a lot of healing about sharing what was going on in my internal world, sharing about my grief and what it was looking like. And anyways, going back to this viral post, people were asking me about, the 2 losses before her. And I realized I haven't really spoken about that a lot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it today. Now, it's interesting how kind of things have unfolded for me in terms of sharing about my motherhood journey and sharing about my grief. The first time I shared about my first miscarriage, it was really, I feel like a divine moment because I shared, if I'm going back to dates, it was on Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. So it was October 14th. And it was 2019, I believe. And it was interesting. I shared about that pregnancy loss for the first time. And then I got pregnant with my husband for the first time after that. And then we had a miscarriage 3 months later, which I also shared about. So speaking about my first miscarriage, speaking about my second miscarriage, and Vienna kind of all happened in the span of a year. It did actually happen all in the span of a year. So I opened up that box of sharing my loss and motherhood journey with the world, and then it just kind of never closed because I walked into more and more loss. So my motherhood journey actually started 13 years ago. Yeah, 13 years ago. And it wasn't with my husband. I was 24 years old, I believe, if I'm doing the math correct. And I was just being a 24-year-old. I mean, maybe I was different than some other 24-year-olds. I grew up in a really small town, and a lot of the women in my community that I was friends with were kind of on a different life trajectory. They all got married kind of young. They had kids kind of young. And I always thought I would be a young mother. I unfortunately hadn't met the man of my dreams, and I was just living life. My life, one thing I don't go into a lot is I come from a pretty chaotic and traumatic childhood, and my life had a different trajectory. And I was okay with that trajectory. I knew I wanted to be a mom, though. Always, always knew I wanted to be a mom. And I was casually dating as a 24-year-old and was casually dating a guy. I'm really giving you the inside scoop. And accidentally, I got pregnant. I will never forget the day that I found out I was pregnant. I thought I was because my boobs were ginormous. That was the first clue. And as a 24-year-old who wasn't trying to get pregnant or going through fertility might do, I wasn't entirely aware of my cycle when my period was going to come. So I didn't 100% know that I was late, but I felt like I was late. And I remember bringing it up to my girlfriend, and I wonder if I could get her to listen to this because she's going to chuckle, because I'll never forget sharing this moment with her about being like, oh, I think I might be pregnant. I'm kind of terrified that I might be pregnant. I'm not really in a stage of my life to get pregnant. But we went and we got a test and we took it in her bathroom, and I got a blazing positive. Now, fast forward, 13 years later, I'm like, that was a very strong positive. Like, I would be thrilled to have a positive like that these days. And I just like sat on the toilet and sobbed my eyes out with her. And then we went to the sexual health clinic and I got blood work, and it was confirmed that I was in fact pregnant. I really had to sit with this because, like I said, I wasn't in the exact stage of my life where I was prepared to have a baby. At this point, I was working, I had 2 jobs. I was working at a bar/restaurant, which was lovely. I loved that job so, so much. I felt like all my coworkers were like family. It was a really actually fun time of my life. And then I also, well, we'll talk about that after, but it was a really fun time of my life. But I remember seeing that pregnancy test and like kind of everything was, flashed before my eyes. That same day, I called up the man who I knew was the father, let him know. And his response was he was thrilled. He was absolutely thrilled that I was pregnant. And I just was like, what? I don't want to, badmouth anyone or bash anyone, but he was not the man I was going to be spending my life with. And he was not in a stage to be a father. But I do know that his response was one of the first responses that made me think positively about this little baby I was carrying. And I went on my way and I thought to myself, after getting some reflection, okay, like this is happening and I'm going to do this. I shared with my best friends, I shared with my family, and I told them that, I'm going to keep this baby. I'm going to step in and be a mom. And that, fear of maybe not being ready to be a mom really quickly turned to excitement. I mean, I was 24 years old. Why couldn't I do this? I could do this. I am a scrappy person. I'm a very loving person, and I would do anything to bring this baby into this world. And that's exactly what I did. I got a new job. I got a job at a bank. Looking back now, a bank is not the job for me. I would, my soul could not survive working at a bank. I'm just a very different person in terms of the way I like to work. But I knew I needed something that was dependable, predictable, would give me mat leave, and give me the flexibility of being with my baby. My family was incredibly supportive, which was shocking to me. They all were very supportive, and quickly everyone's, shock that I was pregnant and going to have a baby also turned to excitement. I took both my parents out for a meal when I told them, and I have a complicated history with my parents, and, their response, I'll never forget that response, because I think it was probably one of the first times in my life I ever heard that they were proud of me. So this was happening. I got an apartment, and we started, this trajectory of planning to bring this baby home. I very quickly got set up with an obstetrician. I very quickly put myself on a midwife waiting list to get midwifery care because I knew I wanted that. And started getting, some prenatal support from my obstetrician, who was a lovely man. If anyone is from my area, I had Dr. Nwube, who is like this over probably 6'3". He's a big man. He's black. And he was just looking at him, you would think like he was like this big, strong man, but he was like the most sensitive and loving and caring person. I'll just never forget, his support. And yeah, that was my life. I was going to be a mom, and I fell in love with this baby, and I had weeks and weeks of, being with this baby. I felt so awful. I was so sick. I remember feeling so sick that it was like alarming to me. It was shocking to me. Like, how do women do this? And that's when I worked at the bank, and being face to face as like a teller, talking to customers when you are like holding back vomit is incredibly hard. And I remember feeling it was so hard that I had to let my employers know, because like I didn't know how I was going to be able to be face to face. And yeah, it was all part of the process. So that was kind of what my life looked like at that point. One day I went grocery shopping, shopping at the grocery store, and I felt, a little gush. And I just remember, being in the grocery store, an instinct, like I had this instinct that kicked in that I was so scared, and I went and checked at the grocery store, and it was blood. At that point, I didn't really know anyone that went through miscarriage. None of my friends had. I knew one girl I went to high school with that had one. But I didn't know anything about miscarriage, and I just knew blood obviously was not a good thing. So I called my mother, and we went right to the emergency department. Now, one thing I wanted to add, because this is a really good way of understanding my family unit at the time, but my sister-in-law was also pregnant, and we were like 2 months apart. She was 2 months ahead of me, and we were so excited. We were going to become mothers together with my sister-in-law, who was my friend that I introduced to my brother. She was one of my closest friends. So this was obviously going to be really excited. I was in their wedding party, and I knew like at that point, everyone in my family was kind of holding their breath when I went to the emergency room, and my mom came with me. And then even my sister-in-law and my brother came to the emergency room with me, which, thinking about back now, like, that's so lovely that they did that for me and that they cared this much. And we got a scan. We did all the things that we needed to do, and we were told the horrible news. I was told the horrible news that my baby no longer had a heartbeat. I had a significant sized subchorionic hematoma that they actually expected the bleeding was coming from. So I actually wasn't miscarrying. And I still have questions at this point. I have obviously a lot more clarity and education now about maybe what was going on that I would like to go back and ask. But at that time, they told me that they thought it was my subchorionic hematoma, actually, and not from miscarrying. And they gave me some options, not really many options. I wish I could remember this more, but I was really young. I was really traumatized. I didn't know that this could happen. And like, I was not absorbing, the information that they were telling me. And my mother was just like not supportive at this point. Like, she just wasn't asking the right questions. And people were just like, whatever Kristin wants. And here I was like, I don't know what I want. I'm a young woman, and I don't have a partner, and this is feeling really traumatizing. Oh, I should probably say to you that I made the decision to have this baby without the partner involved. That's probably really important to know. That's why he wasn't there. I knew he wasn't ready to be a dad, and until he was, I didn't really want him to be a part of this experience, and I was going to do it by myself. So here I was in the hospital room doing this by myself, having to make these decisions by myself, and I ultimately chose to have a D&C. That made the most sense. I do remember them painting the picture of like me having a miscarriage at home as being like so traumatizing and I'm so young and I don't want to do that. They definitely didn't give me, full informed consent of what I was choosing because I didn't know that, having a D&C, you do have a risk of having scarring. There's a lot of other risks with D&C as well. There's risks to everything, right? There's benefits and risks to everything. I remember them, wheeling me back for my D&C and me calling out for my mother because I was so scared. I was honestly so scared. I had never been put under before. This was the first time I was ever having surgery and it felt terrifying. And I knew I was going to wake up and this beautiful dream that I had, the life I was creating, was going to be gone. At this point, I was 11 weeks pregnant. Actually like 10 and a half, closer to 11. And I didn't even know, like, you got to make it to 12 weeks. I didn't know any of that stuff yet. I just was like, I'm 10 weeks pregnant. That seems pretty good. And I'm going to have a baby. And it was simple as that. I woke up in a room by myself from my surgery, knowing that this was over. It truly was devastating. And I think in a way that's hard to explain because it really felt like this baby was just mine. It was mine to hold. It was my baby. And because I didn't have a partner and because it was unplanned, I think a lot of the expectations or reactions around me maybe was a little bit of relief. I was not relieved, obviously. I was heartbroken. And I went on, I started my grief journey then at a time where I did not know anything about grief. I wish now that I could be my own doula back then. There's a first couple days where people were like really soft with me and, they bought me food and played board games with me. And that is a really special memory in my mind because it felt so caring. But there was this expectation for me to move on. And that was just it. The world moved on and I didn't know any better. And so I chose to move on too. And I never really dealt with the loss of my baby. And it festered in my body. It festered in my heart. And I like really struggled after that. In ways that I didn't know I was struggling in the moment. I knew I was so sad. I was so sad. I was like the saddest girl in the world. I just remember laying on the couch being like so depressed. I had a really hard time getting out of that. I had a hard time going back to my job at the bank. So I quit my job. And I found a new one. I knew I needed like different energy. Part of me felt, I've always worked with children, but part of me felt really called to work with children at this point. So I went out and I got a nanny job and I got connected with this beautiful family and I became a nanny of 3 boys. And that really was an amazing outlet for my grief and to put all this unused love somewhere. Grief is love with nowhere to go. And it gave me a place to put that love. And I just loved on these 3 boys. One was an infant, one was 2, and the other one was 5. And he had, pretty severe needs. He was nonverbal, but he was such a lovely little boy and loved my time with this family. But as things were going and as, I wasn't tending to my grief. I was tending it in a way where I was loving on this family, but I wasn't seeing a therapist. I never had anybody to talk about this baby with, to talk about my broken heart with, and talk about how that future and it not happening anymore was so devastating. Like I truly didn't have anyone. It really felt like, the world is expecting me to move on. And I put that pressure on myself as well. So it just never got talked about, but I knew it was like, it was there. It was there in those private moments where I was still just so devastated. And I started noticing, some other symptoms coming up. The body keeps the score, right? And the body was keeping the score on me so hard. I was like getting illness after illness after illness, just like so sick. I was like having such a hard time recovering from illness. Like I didn't know what was going on with myself. And very truthfully, like because I was sick, I couldn't be with these kids as much as I had to be with this family I was in charge of. And I think that family I was working for, I have so much empathy now, but they were probably like, what the heck is going on with this girl? And I remember I knew that something was like going on physically, and my back had started getting really sore. And I decided to, I needed to dig into my health a little bit here. Like something's going on. I need to take care of myself a little bit better. So I started like seeing a chiropractor. I started going to yoga, exercising, putting some effort into my health. And, my back was so bad that we went and got x-rays on it, and like nothing came out of those x-rays. My chiropractor actually suggested like maybe, strengthening your core will help, strengthening your back will help. And that's what kind of got me back into my fitness journey. And my friend, she pulled me into a hot yoga class. It was like my first ever hot yoga class. And if you've ever taken hot yoga, you always remember your first hot yoga class because you're just like, what the hell is happening? Like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I just remember feeling that so much in this class. Like, am I going to survive this? And being done, and you're just like, wow, I did it. I felt amazing. And that's exactly how my first yoga class was. And after that, I just remember the next day waking up and like my toe felt numb, like my right toe felt numb, and me being like, oh, I must have like pinched a nerve in that class. That was super intense. And funny thing is, looking back, I'm laughing. I took one of the people in that class was my chiropractor. I was actually doing it with the chiropractor who was like, you need to get in shape. I'm like, here I am. I'm at this hot yoga class. Anyways, my toe was numb, and I just like, whatever, your toe's numb. I pinched a nerve. Oh, that's interesting. And then it was like the next day, my foot was numb. And then the next day, it was like up to my knee, it was numb. Then it was up to my hip, it was numb. I was like, damn. Even repeating this, I'm laughing, but damn, this pinched nerve is really bad. And I don't know why. I just remember it being a really busy week, and I wasn't able to like go see a doctor for whatever reason. I was 24, and it just was like, I'll deal with this later kind of thing. And then like my left foot started getting numb, and progressively, just like my right leg, the same thing was happening with my left. And I was still able to like use my legs. So I just kept putting it off, and I put it off for about 5 days of looking into this. And I went to a birthday party the one night, and like my cousin, I was sitting in like this chair, and my cousin was sitting in front of me, and she had like a scalding hot cup of coffee, and she put it on the floor. And like, I didn't know it was this bad at this point, but my foot was literally in her coffee cup. And I did not know, like, that's how numb my foot was. And that was like one of those moments in my mind where it was like really alarming. Like, okay, something's obviously going on here. I'm going to have to go see a doctor tomorrow. And everyone around me, because that happened, they were like, Kristin, like, what is happening? That was like a moment, kind of burned into my mind. It just so happened at that party, there was a nurse, and Sherry, I'll never forget my conversation with her, because she came up to me and she was like, you know what, Kristin, like, I don't want to alarm you, but I think this is really serious, and I don't think that you should go home tonight. I think that you need to go directly to the hospital. And I was like, oh, okay. Like I just continually told myself, and maybe, I don't know if it was like a protective mechanism or if it was just like complete ignorance and just didn't know. that this was actually a pretty bad thing and it needed like medical attention right away. So at this point, yeah, I think like 5 days had gone by since that yoga class. So, and like, I'm honestly embarrassed to even say this out loud, but like I said, I was able to like function still. Like my feet were numb, but they were still functionable. So I actually could still drive. And I drove myself to the hospital from this party. And by the way, it was like a 9-year-old's birthday party. It wasn't like anything crazy. I was with my family. Doesn't matter, but I drove myself to the hospital. And when I got there, I sat down with triage, just telling them what was going on. And I have never had a hospital bed given to me faster than that. Never. Like, even with Vienna, when Vienna died, I was never given a hospital bed that fast. Like, it was triage and like right in a room, and it was like right to an x-ray and then right to an MRI. Like, they took it so seriously to the point where I was like, it really terrified me. So I like called my mom, got my mom to come, and there was like a lot of like messed up stuff happening at this point. Because I was like young, no one was telling me like the truth. Like, no one was like, I couldn't handle it. It was like a lot of conversations happening. No one wanted to scare me. And it was scary. My mom was like, tell me what this could be. And they were like telling her what it could be. And here I was like Googling, and I was like, okay, like trying to absorb the information. And the doctor came to me and was like, listen, this is like really serious, and we need to send you somewhere else. We need to send you to Toronto, because we just like don't have the doctors here that can give you what you need right now. Like, we are needing to like upgrade whatever's happening. They were in crisis. At this point, I knew they were in crisis. And then here comes like my extended family, my aunt and my cousins coming in, and they're all like sobbing at this point. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? Sorry, profanity. Like, people are freaking out. And it just so happened that my friend's mom was working as a nurse that time. And they were like getting me ready to transfer me to St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. And I remember just grabbing her hand and being like, you need to tell me what's going on. The doctor is talking to me in medical language. I don't know what it means. I think they're trying to paint a picture that it's not that bad, but here I am being shipped in an ambulance to Toronto. Is this bad? And her eyes like filled up with tears. She's like, Kristin, this is really bad. Yes, this is bad. And it was that moment where I was like, oh my God, where I got really freaked out. So I got transferred to Toronto Hospital with the sirens on. The sirens, not just the lights. Flew to Toronto, got another MRI the second I got there. And that's when my life just kind of really shifted. I did not leave that hospital for, I think I was there for 6 weeks, and then they transferred me to a different hospital, but I stayed in hospital altogether for about 4 months.
While we take a quick break, I want to introduce you to The Haven, my signature support program for mothers who are pregnant again after miscarriage, TFMR, stillbirth, or infant loss. This is not just a course. The Haven is a trauma-informed community program that includes weekly live workshops, expert guest speakers, and ongoing support from me, an experienced doula and fellow loss mom, anytime you need it. You'll also receive one-on-one check-ins, guided journaling prompts, full access to my birth course, Reclaim, and a warm, intimate community of other pal mothers, a place where you can be real, be held, and be reminded that you are not alone in this. Enrollment inside the Haven is now open, and support is available to walk with you throughout your entire pregnancy. From the moment you see those 2 pink lines, all the way until your baby is tucked safely into your arms. If you've been longing for a place to feel safe, feel seen, and be supported throughout your pregnancy, then the Haven was made for you. You can learn more at thedoulalife.ca/haven. Inside the Haven, your baby is remembered, your voice is honored, and you are fully supported every step of the way.
In the time from when I was admitted to when I got to Toronto, and then the next day, like my legs got a lot worse. And then I wasn't able to even like stand up anymore. And then my legs went completely numb. And at one point I wasn't able to go pee or go to the bathroom anymore. That's when like things kind of went really crazy. And my care providers were just like leaving no stone unturned to figure out what was going on with me, why my body was like shutting down. I had every single test under the sun, every single test. I remember a lumbar puncture. It was like excruciating. And at this point, they knew that something was going on, that I should probably be put on steroids right away. They knew something like probably immune or flu related or something was happening. So they put me on steroids as they were like trying to discover what was going on. And pretty soon I was diagnosed with something called transverse myelitis. So there was a lesion growing on my spine. So around your spine, you have something called a myelin sheath. And in your myelin sheath, there are like, I don't know if it's thousands or millions or what, but there's nerve endings. There's a lot of nerves in your myelin sheath. And where my lesion was growing on my spine, it was interrupting the signals of my nerves. And that was shutting down the bottom half of my body, because that lesion was growing, and the more it grew, the more it was interfering. And that's why my pinched nerve, which was not a pinched nerve, was progressing, and my numbness was progressing. So by the time I found this out, that it was what was going on, I was completely numb from my belly button down. And at that point, when they discovered that I had transverse myelitis, came the discovery of what is causing the transverse myelitis, because that is going to be how they treat the transverse myelitis. So they put me on steroids. I was on steroids, IV steroids, for about 10 days. They said usually we don't go any longer than 7 days because it's like so horrible on your system. But they couldn't figure out what was going on. Finally, it was 2 weeks. No, it must have been 10 days. 10 days into that stay, maybe it was 2 weeks. I have a feeling that they stopped the steroids, and that's when they were like really freaking out and were like, we need to figure out what's going on, because you can't not be treated. This is going to get really bad. And that's when they came to me and diagnosed me with lupus. So lupus was what's causing my transverse myelitis. Lupus is an autoimmune disease. It's lifelong. And this is a really important part of my story, because now, knowing what happened with Vienna, now you'll get some kind of context. This is a lifelong thing. And obviously, I didn't have lupus before. The lupus was triggered, suspectedly, because we never will 100% know, but it's suspected to be triggered from my pregnancy that I lost. So that baby that I got pregnant with really transformed my life in huge ways. Not only did it be the first instance where I was a mother, but it also led me down a whole new path. So when I was diagnosed with lupus, they had to figure out a way to treat the lesion, because the steroids that they were doing wasn't working, and we needed something bigger. And my beautiful rheumatologist gave me the analogy of, there's 2 ways we can treat this. We can treat it with a hose, hoping that we put this fire out. You have a fire going on in your body, and we want to put it out. but we're not sure if that fire is going to keep growing and the hose is going to be enough to put it out. And if it's not, it could destroy more things. So it could, it could grow. It could continue to grow, and we could get to a place where the fire is too big that the hose is going to do nothing, and it's going to be too big that we could do anything else. That's the analogy she gave me. Very scary analogy. So you have to remember, at this point, I'm 24 years old. And she compared it to, or we can take out a fire hose, like a big honking fire hose, a whole team of fire hoses, and we could just like douse it and like make sure it's completely out. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what I want. I really want that. And the problem was, with the dousing of the hose comes a lot of other potential issues. So the hose that she was referring to was chemotherapy. And I didn't have cancer. And I was like, oh, cancer, like chemo is usually only for cancer patients. And I was just like completely shocked that that would ever be something that would be recommended to me. And I'm sure anyone who's had chemo has had that moment being like, whoa, like I think just like chemo has this, I don't even know the word, but it has this like power behind it, right? So one of the things that she was preparing me for was that it could affect my fertility moving forward. It can affect my eggs, my egg quality, but also quantity. And she was telling me this. It was February 22nd. And February 22nd was the baby I lost due date. So not only was it my baby's due date, which has its own, obviously, huge emotional weight, but I had my doctor telling me, essentially, we need to do this to save your life, and you might not have children again. It was an obvious decision for me. I wanted to save my life. I wanted the possibility of walking again. I wanted the possibility of having a future. So I chose to do chemo, and we started it that day. I think I did it for 16 weeks, 18 weeks. And we put the fire out. Now, from my understanding about transverse myelitis, a lot of people that have it never fully regain, like the stats of like regaining your ability to walk, your ability to run, your ability to go to the bathroom, like so many different things. Like time is really at an essence, because the longer you wait, the more damage it does and the less likelihood that you'll recover. I'm sure like me being young also was a really positive factor, but the chemo worked. And, when I started chemo, my brother was actually just asking me details about it, but like I had a catheter. I couldn't take a bowel movement. I couldn't get out of bed. I was living in a wheelchair. I needed to be turned in my bed. Like it was really bad. I literally couldn't walk. I went from being a beautiful, healthy 24-year-old woman to being bedridden, and being bedridden for 4 months. So the chemo worked, and little by little, I regained and worked very hard in physiotherapy. I was doing physiotherapy, I think, 2 or 3 times a day. But I regained my strength in my legs, and I was able to first like take, steps with a walker. And then it was with canes. Then it was one cane, and then it was without a cane. But yeah, that was my journey of being diagnosed with lupus and transverse myelitis and my first miscarriage, because it all very much happened really close together, and it changed the trajectory of my entire life. I often get asked, when was the moment, you felt like a mom? And we always talk about how you feel like a mom the moment you see those 2 lines. And I didn't feel that right away. But the moment that I noticed and like really processed that there was a baby growing inside me, and I chose to step into this mother role and envision my life with them and change my life for them, and that was my baby and I loved this baby, that is when my heart changed. And that's when I really did know that I was a mother. And, my baby, so that would have been February. My baby would be turning 13 years old today, or not today, this month. So 13 years and a bit of feeling like a mother and it not being acknowledged. There was like this time after everything happened. So when everything happened, my life was like really put into perspective. The things I wanted in my life was really put into perspective. And one, I knew I wanted to be a mom. I knew that before, but now that I had been a mom and I had been with my baby and lost my baby, that desire in me was more real than ever. I needed to be a mom and I knew I needed to change my life. I thought that, my doctors had some really scary conversations with me. They told me I was told that I could die. I was literally told I could die. Either I could die, I could never walk again, I would be paralyzed for my entire life. And that's very scary obviously very scary to hear. And I did not want that. I did not want that with every fiber of my being. And hearing them say that, I think, is really what got me to fight so freaking hard. Because when I think about it, I know I blew my doctors away by my ability to heal. In the hospital bed, I was looking up all this new agey stuff to do to support my healing. And I was oil pulling in the bed, and I got rid of gluten and sugar and did all these things back then that would be oh wow, she's really into this. She's really trying. And I busted my ass in physiotherapy. And when I started walking again, my doctors literally cried. But afterwards, I knew I was going to leave the hospital with this new found life, a new desire to live a different life. I knew I wanted to meet someone, and I knew I wanted to become a mother. That's what I knew. I knew that me working at a restaurant or a bank was not going to be the best way to do that. And even in the hospital bed, I applied to go back to college, and I did. So I left the hospital, I think it was May. I enrolled for September into it. I enrolled for September. I signed up for online dating, and I think I signed up for online dating maybe a month out of going out of the hospital, and signed up for online dating and met my husband a month into being online. That's how I met him. Hilarious. And that's kind of what began my journey of this, desire and love on my heart and hope for a future that looked different than people were telling me. And this definitely was the first time I was taught and opened up my perspective of the medical world and how much advocacy really is important. Looking back to my time back then, it is incredible that I was not given some sort of social worker or advocate being so young of age. I don't want to get into my family dynamics just because my family story is their story, but I don't have the best, or I have, complex relationships with my parents. So I was a fully independent adult at 24. So these decisions were mine to make. I had no one supporting me through them. And just looking back, that is an incredible reality for me to think of. Makes me feel really sad some days about how maybe it could have been different. But it also made me into who I am today. Like I said, I'm scrappy. I had to be really scrappy all by myself. And it was very painful and changed my trajectory, but it ultimately led me to becoming a special needs worker in the school board. And ultimately led me to meeting my husband. It ultimately led me to put my health and as number one and take a really good look at relationships. There's a lot of things. It's so interesting how sometimes trauma happens and it's just kind of like this limelight on your life, and what you want. And however painful it was and however hard it was, scary it was, I'm glad that it happened. I can say that now, which is crazy. I feel like it's a really good month to share this part of my story just because it is February. So like I said, my baby would be turning 13 this month, and just reflecting on how different my life would be if that had happened and what it would be like. I don't often talk about my losses, my first 2 miscarriages on Instagram, just because, like I said, when I opened up that world, another one happened, and then I got pregnant with Vienna, and then I lost Vienna, and Vienna was what was happening. So that's what I was sharing. But it's really important to know that my life actually changed 13 years ago. That's when my loss journey started. And this world of grief and how the world operates and how people show up for you was really put into perspective. And that's when I experienced it firsthand. Yeah, that's my journey of, stepping into when my heart changed to be a mom. And it's so hard living in a world where it's not recognized. Because in my heart, I felt like a mom. In the world, I wasn't viewed as a mom. And even when I became a doula, when I decided to become a doula, which I will talk about in another episode, that part people didn't understand because they would be like, but you're not a mom. Like, you don't know what it's like. But I knew the medical world at that point, because let me tell you, just because I learned to walk again doesn't mean that my health journey was over. It was not even close to being over. It is what taught me how to be an advocate. It's what taught me how messed up women's health really is. I knew how beautiful it was to, carry a baby, and how sacred that time was and precious that time was, and how horrible loss is. And all of those factors are part of the reason why I did become a doula and why this next natural role for me made sense. That didn't happen for years later, but it's what made me into the woman I am today. And February is an interesting month. It could be a really depressing month. The hype up of January is over. February, if you're in a cold climate, it's like snowy and cold and gray, and nothing really happens in February. Yeah, there's Valentine's Day, but Valentine's Day can be depressing in itself. And I know that there's a lot of moms in my community, a lot of my clients who have really precious days that fall in February. And I thought I would share this journey with you, this part of my story with you, to let you know that you're seen and you're not alone. I recently have been sharing online about what comes next for family planning, and the truth is I don't know. I go back to the hospital bed and making that decision to do chemotherapy and all these drugs and treatments for a very long time, and what that has done to my body and where I am at now, being 37 and having like severe low AMH, I suspect that next week or this week I'm going to be diagnosed with DOR. I go back to that, and everything is connected, and it's all very reflective. And if you are on a journey of, just thinking about your baby more this month, or thinking about next choices, or thinking about the choices you have made, I just want you to know I see you and I'm with you. And I just hope you have so much grace for yourself. Because one of the things that I tell myself all the time, and I tell my clients this day in and day out, is you can only make, the best decision you can in the moment with the information that you have, with the person that you are. And, hindsight's always 20/20. But the difference with hindsight is, even if you chose a different option, you'll never know what that outcome would have been. And we could be, regretting what happened with that other choice as well. So I just would encourage you to have so much grace for yourself. Yeah, that's a little bit about my story. And thank you for, sitting in on this so long. We went 54 minutes. I didn't know if I was going to chat that long, but it felt really good to be able to share it. I'm going to come on here and talk about more, and no, it's not always going to be about my story. There's so much that I share in workshops and with my clients that can be so hard to share on Instagram in like 90-second clips, right? Or in like tiny little captions. And unless you're in those workshops, you're not going to really get access to some of those things. So I thought I would come on here and share more and teach more and kind of invite you into this little world of mine more. Sharing this part of my story, I would be lying if I didn't say there are some insecurities or vulnerabilities sharing it, because I'm like, oh, that's kind of embarrassing, or like, how did I not know that? Or like, do I really want the world to know that? But when I go back to my inner knowing, I know that, again, I made the best decision I could at that time with who I was and what I knew. And it made me into the woman I am today. And if you're thinking about that, about past decisions too, I would want to remind you of that as well. You did the best you could. And it made you into the woman you are today. And that woman is pretty spectacular. That's it for me. Next time I come on, I'm going to share a little bit about my second miscarriage, because that was very different. Could be any more different. It was with my husband, and I chose very different choices. So looking forward to sharing more about that. And I'm also probably going to share a little bit about my conversation or my reading with Emily the medium, because there is some really big things on my heart about that, a little bit about this potential egg freezing journey, and I've never really been able to share about William. So we're going to do all of those things over the next few months. But as always, thank you so much for being here. I care about you. I'm so grateful for you. If you're needing more support in your journey, whether that be in your loss journey, if you're trying to conceive again, if you're thinking about trying to conceive again, if you're pregnant after loss, or you are postpartum after loss, there are so many amazing supports available to you. And I really hope that you can utilize those. Until next time, sending so much love.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If this episode touched your heart, it would mean the world to me if you took a moment to rate and review the Rainbow Connection. Your words help this podcast reach other mothers who need to hear these stories, the ones still searching for hope, for comfort, and for connection after loss. Every review, every star, every kind word truly makes a difference. Thank you for helping me keep these stories alive. I'll see you in the next episode.